Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and a good night. I am King Pigley. This is Gaming Imperfectly, and welcome to the channel. If you're new to the channel, I am King Pigley. I hope you like what you see because we are going into Missing 411 today, guys. This story is so creepy that it is beyond belief. It actually culminates with a crow screeching like a woman to get another hunter's attention. And when that hunter finally pays attention and what that hunter is led to by that crow, sent chills up and down my spine. Stick around because it's going to get scary. September 19th of 2004, Bugsy Springfield, whose real name was Robert, but known as Bugsy and beloved by his family and friends, was going to go hunting with his two sons. He had a 13-year-old son and a much older boy whom he had actually adopted. Because Robert was the kind of guy, Bugsy was the kind of guy that did those types of things. He was a good man. By all intents, by all accounts, and by everybody who knew the guy, for all intents and purposes, he was a stand-up guy. He was so stand-up, in fact, that by the time he was 17 years old, Robert Springfield felt a need to serve his country. And service is one of those things, guys, that most people don't do. See, we as human beings have a tendency to be self-serving, but when it comes to serving others or something bigger than yourself, most people shy away from it. And that's fine too, but Robert wasn't that kind of person. So at 17 years old, Robert Springfield joined the United States Marine Corps. When he was in the Marine Corps, it is also said in certain reports that I've read about the guy that he was also a part of their Special Operations Unit, which is their equivalent of Special Forces. And so not only was Robert Springfield a selfless human being and one to give himself over to service and a nice man and a good man, but he was also kind of a badass. And so when he finally got out of the military and went back home, which he actually called Casper, Wyoming home, it was no doubt it was actually to the great relief of his people because they were always worried when he was in the military that he would be sent somewhere and of course, die in combat, which is a real possibility when you serve in the military. When he got back to Casper, Wyoming, Robert started working on the oil fields, which is hard, heavy work, but Robert didn't shy away from that either. Most importantly about Robert, and something that was very passionate and something he had great pride in for himself, is Robert was Native American, and he was a member of the Crow Native American people. And so living in Casper, Wyoming, it was awfully close to the Bighorn Mountains of Montana, which is where the Crow Native American Reservation is. And also where hunting land is that Robert and his family, being a member of the Crow Native American tribe, could go and hunt without any problems. In fact, he had permission to do so, and not everybody can do that. So September 19th of 2004, Robert and his two sons got in their truck and drove to the Bighorn Mountains. Now, if you've never been to the Bighorn Mountains, guys, it is rugged as heck. I mean, holy crap, is that some serious terrain. And the Crows Reservation, where these hunting grounds were, where they were going to go, were known for big game, but it was also known as hard to navigate. Like, it was a super canyony, rocky, foresty terrain, mountainous for sure. But Robert was prepared for this, and so was his boys, because being former Special Forces and being prior military, he had learned lots of survival skills, and he had also shared those with his son. So these guys were exceptionally good at being outdoors. Also, there is a part of Native American culture in which you brace nature, that you look at the trees and the rocks and the wind and the air and the spirits and all these things as your brothers and sisters, and that they're a part of you and you're a part of it. At least some Native Americans do. I'm not saying everything's like that, guys, but I grew up next to the Cherokee Native American Reservation in North Carolina, and I knew quite a few of them who believed in a oneness between their people, the Cherokee, and nature itself and the spirit thereof. And Robert was along those same veins. In fact, he does have a Native American name, but I am not going to butcher it by trying to speak it. But he was very proud of his Native American heritage, and so spending time in outdoors, and not only did he enjoy the hunt, but he also just enjoyed it because of a certain belief in the oneness with nature. And so when they went out there, nobody was concerned that anything was going to happen. They had gone there several times over the years. It was a mainstay for them to go hunt in this area. It was not that big of a deal. This was pretty standard. What they decided to do was Robert was going to go down into a canyon, and his two boys were going to try to push elk from up high down into the canyon. Now, they did not have firearms. It was bow season, and so Robert was carrying his bow and arrow, and so were his boys. At the point of separation, as often occurs in the missing 411 books, guys, and the 411 phenomenon, there's always generally a point of separation, and this was it. Robert went away, the boys went their other direction, but they had planned a meeting time to make it back to Robert's truck, and that way they would know, wait, it's time to go, we need to get out of here. So, well clothed and prepared for, it's September in Montana, so yes, it's getting very cool in the evenings and stuff like that, but it's not frigid. And again, having a tremendous amount of outdoor experience and survival skills, Robert was completely prepared for spending a few hours max, outdoors. At the minimum, even. Robert was capable of spending days outdoors if need be, being prior special forces, and survive if had be, given a pocket knife and a, book of matches. Nonetheless, guys, when time came for them to meet back up at the truck, Robert didn't show. His kids waited around, honked the horn, tried to get their dad's attention. They called for him. They searched for him for a little while, but there was no sign of Robert. They looked and looked. No sign of him, which is really weird. But the kids, again, weren't thinking, well, Dad, something terrible's happened, because it's their father, this ex-Special Forces Marine. He's like Superman to these guys. He was really, above human in their eyes. And I don't know if everybody sees their dad that way, but a lot of people do see their dad kind of larger than life. And these guys most certainly thought that about their father, Robert. But they couldn't find him. And they just thought, well, Dad got lost, and they were going to give him trouble for this. And they said, well, Dad's going to be embarrassed. But, after a while of looking, and it got dark and no sign of him, they were like, we got to go get help. And they did. A huge search was kicked off, guys. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is called the BIA, they came in, which is kind of like state FBI, but for Native Americans. And they are one of the few agencies, government agencies, police force-wise, that can actually operate on Native American territories, on the reservations. And so they called in, then, of course, Sheriff's Department, the Native American sheriffs and whatnot, all got involved. The FBI was called in. And they searched. They flew helicopters over where Robert was. The whole kit and caboodle, guys. Not only did they have helicopters and dogs and everything else looking for Robert, but the helicopters were even mounted with infrared. So that at night, your body would light up like a freaking candle. And there was no sign of Robert. They looked for weeks. Bad weather set in. They had to call it off. But even the family, after the initial search was given up on, they looked for Robert for a few weeks. And when they called it, the family and local Native American people still went out looking for Robert because they just could not believe that something like this had happened to him. It was just so far beyond their comprehension because he was a tough dude and well-trained and well-versed in the wild. So how could anything like this happen? Nonetheless, no sign of Robert was ever found. And the FBI eventually went back and they were like, well, we suspect foul play, but there's no evidence of anything, and that was the end of it. Guys, a year went by. In October of 2005, another hunter was hunting in this same land, and all of a sudden, as he's making his way through the underbrush and through the thick forest that was there in these mountains, the Bighorn Mountains, he heard what he thought was a woman screaming at first. But then he quickly realized that it was a crow. It was kind of annoying, but he didn't pay much attention to it at first. But the crow was incessant. It just kept shrieking and shrieking and shrieking to the point to where it actually started to really put the hunter off. And he was like, what is up with this crow? So he started paying attention to it and followed the sound. And when he came into kind of a clearing area, there was a tree that about 8 foot up had been broken off and had been downed in what looked to be a storm. Sitting on top of the stump of the half-broken tree was a crow, screaming over and over and over again. And the hunter's looking up at this going, wow, that's really weird. And about that time, the crow looked directly at the hunter and stopped screeching and just stared at him. Now, this really creeped the hunter out. It would have creeped me out. Who wouldn't it creep out? But then the crow kind of looked down, like turned its head. You know how birds look with that one eye, that creepy one eye stare they give people? So it kind of turned and looked down the tree, and it drew the hunter's attention. And when it did, he saw a partial skull and some bones and what looked to be a pair of boots and a rolled up belt and a bundled up jacket, a balled up jacket, all sitting at the base of this tree. That was pretty much it for the guy. When he looked back up and the bird's still staring directly at him, the guy had had enough. And so he DD'd out. He beat it out of the woods. He's like, I'm out of here. But he went and got the sheriff and brought them back and was like, check this out. There it was. So the sheriff got a partial skull. There was a femur bone, but that was pretty much all the bones that were there. It wasn't very much. And then there was, in fact, a rolled up belt. So if somebody took the belt that you put around your waist and roll it up, and a balled up jacket with a tear in the back of it, and a pair of boots. But that was it. That was all that was there. They, of course, did DNA and everything else. And yes, the partial skull and everything was that of Robert Springfield. The FBI immediately came in to investigate because they suspected foul play. Initially, they even reported that they believed that Robert was shot, but they quickly recanted that and said, no, what actually happened was that a tree fell on Robert. It was a weather balloon. Swamp gas did it. I don't know. Sounds like garbage to me. They kept Robert's bones, the FBI did, for years. The family finally had to sue the FBI to get the remains of Robert Springfield back so they could bury the man on native soil, to put him with his people. But the FBI's final claim to it all was that Robert was killed by a falling tree. Robert's bow and arrow were never found. Neither were none of his clothes. Who rolled up the belt? Who put his boots right there? Why is there a tear in the back of his jacket? And where are the rest of his bones? If Robert was killed by that tree falling on him, where's the rest of his body at? And most importantly, the kids would have heard the tree fall. Robert, what? And randomly, Robert's sitting under a tree and all of a sudden it just breaks off and the dude doesn't even try to move. The kids never hear a cracking of a massive tree breaking in half on a calm day in September. It's just complete and total nonsense. But that's what makes these missing 411 cases so crazy. And if you're interested in the missing 411 phenomenon, guys, by all means, this one comes, like I said, David Paulides is the author of the books. I'll leave a link in the description below where you can find out more about David Paulides. He has a YouTube channel. Go check him out. These books are for sale. Check them out yourself. They're fascinating. And this case, the case of Robert Springfield, is just completely insane, guys. The weird thing, the most strange thing, where Robert's body was found, where the tree had broken, was 50 yards away from the camp, the base camp that him and his kids had set up when they had first gone hunting in the first place. Remember, this whole place had been searched by dogs and helicopters and everything else. Police, family members, other Native Americans, all searching this area. And in fact, to this day, Robert's wife, Veronica, still says they searched that area and Robert wasn't there a year ago. So how, why, what? I don't know. I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Please leave me something in the comment section below. And if you're new to the channel, you've been here this long, I surely hope you'll consider subscribing. But no matter what, please smash in that like button. It helps me out and lets me know you're enjoying the content. And that's super important to me. And also, please hit the bell, get the notifications, guys, so you don't miss out on the next crazy story I'm going to bring to the channel. That's it, guys. And I will see you guys in the next video.